but it is there in Saudi Arabia. One thing I thought was very interesting when I talked to him, I said, we believe Moses was here in Saudi Arabia for 40 years. He said, no, he was here 10 years. And I said, well, we believe it was 40 years. And he said, the Holy Quran says it was 10 years. And so then I said, Christians will come here to see some of these sites. Are you okay with them visiting? He said, well, we have to tell them the truth. And I said, are you okay with them coming here and believing differently than you? And again, he said, we have to tell them the truth. So the problem runs into is when their beliefs, when your beliefs conflict with the Quran, that's a problem. But they believe Moses was there, but they believe he was only there 10 years. He did say that after he was there 10 years, Moses went back to Egypt, and he spent the next 40 years convincing Pharaoh to let the children of Israel go. What does that strike you as? That strikes me as a poor negotiator. If it takes him 40 years. But that's what they believe. This is the Edomites, the Moabites, and the Ammonites. You can see there, they're in Jordan, the civilizations that were there. This was in a museum. Now then, this is a very interesting place right here. We got this picture, but if you notice over there to your right, you see those white buildings? That's an Egyptian a checkpoint. They told us, do not take a picture of that. You can take a picture straight, but don't take the pictures of the building there on the right, because there was armored military, like a tank there. This is where the children of Israel would have turned into the rocky defile coming down to this beach. This is when we were in Saudi Arabia, we went to the place where they would have come out on the one side in Saudi Arabia, and you could look across and you could see the opening in the gap where they would have come through, coming onto the beach. The sad thing about it is, to get over there, we had to go all the way around the top. You couldn't take a boat across or a ferry across. You had to go all the way around. It would take a long part of a day. When it's just 10 miles across, you would think, man, I could just go across, I'd be there and be done. But here's what's very interesting about this. The Israeli government mapped this before Saudi had a lot of a navy on that side of the Red Sea, and they mapped this whole part of the Red Sea. And it's very deep on either side of this crossing, but at this crossing, they mapped it at 900 meters at the deepest spot, and it gradually goes down at 5 degrees and comes up at 5 degrees. If you go north or south of Nueva Beach, you have cliffs that drop off hundreds of feet. And so this is the only place the children of Israel could have gone across with a gradual slope up and back down, and it's all sand. So it's very, very interesting. Now then, this is the site. So when Solomon, you can look it up in 1 Kings, it says Solomon had a navy pretty much where Eilat is today. He had a navy there, and he went down and got gold and sailed the Red Sea here. And he erected, we believe, 2 columns to mark the crossing of the Red Sea. This pile of rocks marks the spot where there was one on the Saudi Arabian side back in the early 1980s. The Saudi Arabian government removed it. When we were there, we asked Zizi what they did with it. He says, I remember it was removed, but he says, I don't know what they did with it. I will try to find out what happened to it. When Ron Wyatt was there, he said he saw the word Solomon on it and crossing and some other words. And right after that, it was removed. Some people said they threw it in the Red Sea. Some people said they dug a hole and buried it. But he said he would find out where it is. The one on the Egyptian side is still standing. It was moved back from the water. The writing has all been removed or is weathered away. And here it is on the Egyptian side in Nueva. So there was one that matched on the side with Saudi Arabia. And here's a map that the Israeli government did that mapped it. It's gradual there, but you see the deep dark blue on the one side. There's another picture. It gets very deep, but it's very gradual going there and then down. Here's a picture somebody took. It looks like a chariot wheel. Some people have described it when they go and scuba dive in that area. It looks like a junkyard. One thing I find that's fascinating, that building, has anybody been to Dubai? Anybody want to go to Dubai? Like to go to Dubai? Okay. Well, Saudi Arabia is trying to build a building that's going to be taller than this one. It's called the Jeddah Tower, I think it's called. But this is the tallest building at present. It stands 2,717 feet. It's 828 meters tall. The Red Sea crossing where the children of Israel crossed was 900 meters at the deepest spot. Now, what would you think if you were going through, let's say the crossing site was 400 feet wide? What would you think if you're looking up and you're seeing a wall of water that's over 2,700 feet on either side? We think of 100 feet, 200 feet. It was much, much deeper than that. Pretty amazing, isn't it? You see the pictures in the bedtime stories, the kid goes over and he reaches in and grabs the fish. I don't think they would have done that. Here's a picture of us diving in the Red Sea. Here's another picture of what appears to be a chariot wheel. So I was going to read you a quote. One thing that really struck me about this is if you're an enemy, would you, after you had seen what happened, would you have followed the children of Israel into that path through the Red Sea? Huh? Now I want to read what Ellen White says. This makes a lot of sense to me. Because if I saw that, I don't think I would have rushed in. I think I would have stayed back a while. When they came onto the beach that day, the children of Israel kind of went to the south of the beach, and the Egyptian army came onto the beach at the same time. So they both were on Nueva on the beach, okay? Because Ellen White makes a statement here, so if I can find it. I'm going to read a couple. All night long sounded the trampling of the host of Israel, but the cloud hid them from the sight of their enemies, the Egyptians. Weary with their hasty march, had seen the Hebrews only a short distance before them, and as there seemed to be no possibility for escape, they decided to take a night's rest, speaking of the Egyptian army, and make an easy capture in the morning. The night was intensely dark, and the clouds seemed to encompass them like some tangible substance. Deep sleep fell upon the camp. Even the sentinels of the Egyptian army slumbered at their posts. Okay, here's another quote. In the darkness and the confusion, they rush on in their pursuit, not knowing that they have entered the bed of the sea, and hemmed in on either side by the belting walls of water. They long for the mist and darkness to pass away and reveal to them the Hebrews and their own whereabouts. The wheels of the chariot sink deep into the soft sand. The horses become entangled and unruly. The angels of God go through the host and remove their chariot wheels. Confusion prevails, yet they press on, feeling sure of victory. So when they entered in, it was dark. They didn't see those walls of water. Because if I would have seen those walls of water, I don't think I would have rushed in. So it was dark, and she says they did not realize what was happening. Amid the terror and confusion, the lurid light reveals to the amazed Egyptian the terrible waters massed up on the right hand and on the left. They see the broad path that the Lord has made for his people across the shining sands of the seas, and behold, triumphant Israel safe on the other shore. So, here's another one. They heard the sound of the marching of the Hebrews, and they could see nothing, for the cloud gave light to Israel, was to the Egyptians a wall of darkness. Guided by the sound, they followed on into the miraculous path God had prepared for his people. All night they followed, but they moved slowly, for their chariots drove heavily. Yet still they moved on, expecting soon to break through the cloud and overtake the fugitives. At last the shadow of night passed away. The morning dawned, and the pursuing army was almost within reach of the fleeing Hebrews. Before their astonished eyes, the mysterious cloud changed to a pillar of fire reaching from earth to heaven. So when they were in the midst of it, I believe as they saw that, like, uh-oh, I just cannot imagine looking up, seeing a wall of water, 2,900 feet or however high it was. That'd be sheer terror, wouldn't it? And then you see it move. So that's why underneath there, crossing looks like a junkyard. It was scattered for miles. So when we left Saudi Arabia, we wanted to go and do that diving in Nueva. So we had to cross through Jordan. We had to go from Saudi Arabia to Jordan, to Israel, to Egypt. So you would go up to the border, walk out of the border, go into the next border, take a cab, go to the next border, check out, check in, take a cab to the next border, check out, check in, until we got to the side of Egypt. And when we got there, we got into our cabs. We were going to go down to Nueva to dive the next day. And when we got there, I was ready to go. And they said, no, we have to wait. And I said, what are we waiting for? They said, we were waiting for escort. So they had 2 military vehicles in front and back to take us through an area where they said there's been a lot of terrorists. They really want to make sure no tourist gets hurt. They're visiting because anytime there's a death to a tourist, the tourism dies. And it's so much of their economy. They are very protective. We went there, and then our way back, we wanted to go into Israel. We wanted to go and get sulfur balls at Sodom and Gomorrah. And so we went there, and we did that. And then from there, Steve Chang, I said, have you ever been to En-Gedi? He said, no. So this is a picture at En-Gedi. This is where David was hiding from King Saul. The springs of En-Gedi is beautiful. And this is one of the waterfalls. It's the waterfall of David. And I took a couple pictures there. This one, here's another picture. And it's brown except for this one place where the water comes through. And there's quite a bit of water there. So this is the caves and the spring of En-Gedi. Here's a couple pictures. Yeah, this Steve and I there. Now here is where Sodom and Gomorrah is believed to be. It's at the base and kind of around where Masada is. The top layer there is pretty much all ash, but along this side that's sloped down, you can find all kinds of sulfur balls. And if you ever burn one, they're really neat. They burn really, really hot. Here's another picture. And that picture behind there, that's Masada. There, the flat top mountain behind this area. Okay, this is when we went into Jordan. Yeah, here's a picture on the Dead Sea. Has anybody been to the Dead Sea before? You been there? Don't get the water, don't get it in your eyes. It'll burn you. It feels very oily. We did it several years ago. Here's us leaving one of the borders going into Israel, one of the checkpoints. Now this is when we were coming back. We decided we left through flying out of Amman, Jordan, and we wanted to go to Petra and spend the day there. And when we were going up this to the top place, the high place at Petra, I met these guys, and they were selling fresh pomegranate juice. And when we were there, I sat down there, Carrie and I, and we had some juice, and I started selling for him. People would come up the trail, and they always say, where are you from? So I was saying, where are you from? And I'd say, I'm from California. Where are you from? There's a lot of Americans there visiting. And I say, you've got to come back. This guy has the best pomegranate juice anywhere around. And they were like, man, you stay here all day, we'll give you half of our profit. The guy there behind, sitting on the bench in the black, the big beard there, was very interesting because I talked to him and I said, where do you live? He said, I used to live here. No, I first said, so how do you get to have this shop here? How do you get to have this place? He said, it was my grandfather's. My grandfather lived here. This was his place. And he showed us down below, behind those cups down there. There's caves that are dug in there. And he said, I was born, and he pointed down. He goes, I was born in that cave right there, and that cave right there was my grandparents' cave. And then back in the early, I think, 1990s, the government came in and said, listen, if you move out, we'll build you a home. So he said, we moved away. He said, but it was much better when we lived in the cave. But I took a picture with him. I'll show you that in a second. Here is in Petra. Here he is. So a couple of those caves right behind us there is where he was born. And just a cave cut out of stone. One thing they've just uncovered at Petra is in front of that temple there, they've started excavating down, and they found another city that's underneath the city. And you go up and look down, you can see where they've dug it out, and there's stairways going down to new rooms underneath. Here's a picture looking down. Now, some of our group took donkeys. I didn't take a donkey. They said, you have to take a donkey, you can't do it. I said, no, I can do it. It was $30 for a donkey. So I put Carrie on a donkey, and I ran all the way up and all the way back. It was probably about, I don't know, probably 5 miles there and 5 miles back. But it was fun. They said, you can't keep, donkeys are not that fast. Here's going into Petra. Here's near the top of Petra, another temple that was carved out of stone. You think how long, this is, thousands of years old, and it still looks pretty nice. It was amazing what this looked like when it was in its prime. Here's a picture where you can sit there and overlook the area and have a tea. Now, I'm a flooring guy, so I have to show you this picture. This is a temple that's, 4,000 years old. And the stone was hand cut. And it looks pretty good. It was very tight. And I thought, man, and that's a drain. They actually had a recessed drain that had a cover on it. The cover's gone, but that's a drain that would drain the floor, and I guess they would clean it. Pretty amazing. And this is a picture of Carrie. Now then, I have a couple of things I want to share with you, and then we're going to be done. I went over and I read some things, because when you ask the people in Egypt, they say Saudi Arabia is on the Sinai Peninsula. And Sinai that's there on the Sinai Peninsula, it was Constantine's mother-in-law that picked the spot. And Constantine picked a lot of spots or people, but he had his mother-in-law had a dream, and she determined that it was on the Sinai Peninsula. But do you remember when Moses fled Egypt? Where did he flee to? He fled to Midian. Some people try to say the Sinai Peninsula is Midian, but the Sinai Peninsula has never been Midian. It's always been on the other side of the Red Sea over there on the Gulf of Aqaba. So here's some things that I wrote down that it has to be in Saudi Arabia. So the Red Sea crossing, to me, that beach, that huge beach that just sits out there, and the way Ellen G. White describes it about them coming into a rocky defile and then coming out on a beach with the Red Sea in front of them and the Rocky Mountains surrounding them, and with her account, to me, the land bridge is a good example of how that land bridge is there, and it's still there to this day. What people have found there in the bottom of all kinds of stuff that looks like a junkyard. The columns on both sides of the Gulf of Aqaba that Solomon put up. And then Moses is recognized that he was in the town where Jethro was from, down in Albad. And from the town where Jethro was, where he tended the flocks, you can see what we believe is the Mount Sinai, the true Mount Sinai. You can see it from where Jethro was and where Moses was tending his father-in-law's flocks. It's really interesting that all the sites have been protected for all these years by the Saudi government. It's put fences around them. And so that's a sign to me that that's probably what is there. You'll find Moses Spring. The locals call it the Mount of Moses, Moses Cave. And the cave, we believe, is Elijah's cave. The pictures of the Egyptian bulls all over the altar. And the most recent one that was just found by someone who was over there the last few days about this red person that was kneeling in front of a bull there at that altar site. Also the grave site that has a fence around it. And then also one thing I did not mention, at the base of Mount Sinai, there's the altar of Moses. And there's some pieces of white marble that looks like a pillar was there at one time. And somebody said that they had found years ago, back in the 80s, a piece of white marble that had Solomon's name on it. So possibly Solomon went there and put a monument up at that site also at one time. The place where there's the 12 springs at Elim and the many palm trees. The split rock at Horeb. It's such a prominent feature, and it fits along where, if you read all of the accounts and study it out, Ellen White leads you to believe that with the children of Israel on the backside of Mount Sinai, when they were at the split rock, and this split rock, this prominent feature, is on the backside of Mount Sinai. The menorah, me too, is that this menorah was there on this rock, and it had been removed many years later when we went back and tried to find it. And the blackened by fire coming down from, believe that that's what it was. And also at the area where they could have had an encampment. There's also some wells at the bottom valley. There was about 4 or 5 wells that would be fun to excavate. One of them was excavated years ago when the water came out. Waters that flowed out of Mount back then. So that's what I saw there, and it was pretty exciting to be there. It was nice that I got to take Carrie with me and to experience it with Carrie. I never thought I'd be able to go to Saudi Arabia. We didn't feel, probably the least safe I felt was in Cairo. It's a very dirty city. The pollution there is terrible. But Saudi Arabia, the people were friendly, never felt endangered at all. Jordan, didn't feel, I did get pulled over in Jordan. I was driving down the road heading back to the airport, and the policeman walked out in the road, pulled me over, and he came up to the car. I didn't speak his language, he didn't speak my language, but he said license. I gave him the license, and then they have a piece of paper you have in the glove box of your rental car. You hand it to him, he writes the ticket in that piece of paper. You put it back in the glove box, and when you go and return your car, you just have to tell him you got a ticket. I was going like 10 miles over the speed limit, and my ticket was 20 Jordanian dollars, which ended up being $28. Steve was going through town, and he got a ticket too, but he was going like 30 miles over the speed limit, and his was only 20 Jordanian dollars. So I told them when we turned our vehicles in, the other one in our group got a ticket too. But when we turned our cars in, I said, I'm so thankful I got the ticket here, not in California. Because in California, I said it would be between $200 and $300 probably. So I said, I really like your price of your tickets. So it was a blessing. I would love to go back. I would love to go and dive more at the Red Sea. We only were able to do 2 dives, but it was amazing to see how those sites in Saudi Arabia, nobody's visited them. Nobody's been there. I mean, there's been less than 50 people from America that probably have ever been there to those sites. So if you have opportunity to go, go. Nobody's been there. It's pretty amazing. And you can see all kinds of inscriptions on rocks as you go around too. When we were at Mount Horeb, we saw inscriptions on rocks of similar things that were around the golden calf altar. They say it's locals, but It needs to be more, research needs to be done. So, the Exodus is real, and it shows how God led the children of Israel, and that He had a plan already in place to take them safely through the Red Sea. And it's just amazing to me to be able to go there and just to see some of these places. With that, can we all bow our heads? Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you how you have led in the past, Lord, and I pray that each one of us, that we will look to the past, how you've led, and know that you're faithful and that you will lead us in the future. You did miraculous things, and you want to do miraculous things in the future for every one of us. May we hold on to you by faith, that we might be ready when you come. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.